Okay, so I am talking to you today about my ancient Roman album, and I've done a PhD now, which is now completed and submitted about the ancient Roman music. So the way I started was to look at the other music that's available, the ancient Greek music, and work out what kind of music I wanted to write, because you have to look first at the different types of music and what the function is. So as Isabel, or I think somebody on one of the Rostra podcasts had already said, Emperor Nero loved to play the lyre, and he played what we call Olympic music. But it's very difficult to know what that would have sounded like, because one person playing a lyre could kind of play almost anything. And so I was thinking about what kind of music could I do that would come together in such a way that there would be very little dispute on what it would sound like. And so I decided to do the music of the common man, the street musician, the kind of pop music of the time. And so I brought together what I consider to be a typical ancient Roman ensemble. And the way I did that was I looked at iconography, which means the vases and the pictures and the things of the time, and decided what a Roman ensemble would be made up of based on the Roman ensembles that were painted onto these vases and pictures and mosaics. And I came up with a lyre, an aulos, percussion and vocals, and that was our standard setup. And so I got everyone into a studio, listened to what it sounded like, and then wrote the album. We had some difficulties immediately. So on every vase I've seen, the lyre and the aulos were always playing together. But when you put an aulos and a lyre in a studio together, the aulos is incredibly loud. I thought the aulos would sound like an oboe because it's got a double reed, but actually it was more like a bagpipe. It was incredibly loud, whereas the lyre is really soft. But we know they played together. So one of the questions remaining is, how did they do that? Did the aulos stand in front so that when the audience was listening to the music, they could hear both instruments, or did they never play the same thing at the same time? So there are still some questions remaining. Also, when the aulos player turned up to the studio, he had a reed problem, and it meant that he was a quarter tone flat. And that was an interesting problem, because we had to think, what would we do if we were Roman? And the answer is, he'd either have a different set of reeds or he'd use a different instrument, but we couldn't do that in the studio. So we had to pitch shift him, which is a very pop music solution to that problem. So he played his line and then we pitch shift it. So we made it lower. So like you normally use that in pop music with like Taylor Swift or something would sing a line. And then if she's a little bit pitchy or a bit out of tune, you can actually electronically move her down. Now, I wanted to ask you, am I talking too fast and do you understand what I'm saying? Because I know my accent is so different from what you're used to. Is everything okay? Should I carry on? Okay, hang on, let's have a drink. I get so excited talking about the Roman music that I get faster and faster and faster, and then you just have to tell me to slow down. So they're in the studio. The aulos was horribly out of tune, and we decided we were going to have to pitch shift him. And so we pitch shifted the aulos so it worked with everything else. And then, of course, in my PhD, I had to say that I'd done that, and that obviously that's not an original solution to that problem, but the discipline of recreated ancient and Roman music is new. And I think as the discipline grows, because there's only kind of 2 aulos players in the world that are doing it professionally at the moment. And I think as the discipline grows and we have more aulos players, they'll learn how to be more adaptable to different situations. So the aulos player that I used, he had 2 sets of reeds, but he'd just flown back from the US and they'd been through an airport and they just didn't like it. They just weren't working properly. So that was another question. The other thing was I wanted to find percussion instruments, and there really is only one in ancient Roman iconography, and that is a small frame drum. And if you look at the front of the CD cover, I can probably show you that if I'm fancy and share my screen. Steve,
I'm going to double check, make sure we can do that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll carry on talking. The small frame drum that they use, which is like an Irish folk drum, that tends to be the only thing that you see in Roman iconography. But I was aware that they had to have different percussion instruments. That's not enough. You can't just have a frame drum. They did have some cymbals, but that tended to be in religious music. And I didn't want to do religious music because the Vestal Virgins trained for 40 years and I had no idea what their music sounded like. So I decided to try and find another percussion instrument. And I found a leaflet in the Getty Museum about a cup they've got that rattles. Oh, okay.
So yes, okay, we're recording. Okay, and now you should be able to share screen.
Okay, so I'll show you the drum first. So can you see my desktop now?
Yes.
Right, so here is the frame drum. Can you see this drum here that I'm circling? That's the frame drum that you see in all Roman iconography, and these little cymbals they often use, but that's not enough. We needed more percussion. So I found at the Getty Museum a cup, which I will show you. It's here. Can you see that? Now this cup's really special because it has beads in the bottom. In the base of it, there's little beads. And so I'll show you an X-ray of that cup. And here you can see little beads. So what we decided to do was to have one of those cups made. Now, hang on, I've lost you all.
Are you wanting to see us?
Yes. Got it, done it. Okay, so those little beads in that cup, you can either have them in the rim of the cup at the top, or you can have them in the base of the cup. So the rim of the cup is here and the base is here. So we had one made and we put the beads in the rim of the base, and that's the earliest version of those cups. The later versions of the cups have the beads in the rim. So here is the representation of that cup, and here's the beads in the base. And so it does this. But it's better if it does this. And then it's like a bell. So we put those beads in that cup, and then we use that in the ensemble as well. And that was a new instrument that's never been used in an ensemble, was a new musical instrument. And so that was brilliant for the PhD, because suddenly I had discovered a new musical instrument that could be musical. And so people had previously thought it might be musical, but nobody had ever made one. So I was the first person to actually have one made and use it in a recording. And it was okay. It just sounds like a rattling cup. But actually, when you put them in the rim of the cup, they do something very special. Because if you look at the Getty X-ray, which I'll try and show you again. Here we go. You can see the bottom of this cup here has you can see the bowls are going around the rim, and then there's a double rim at the bottom. And what that means is when the bowls clash together, because there's only 2 beads left in this cup now, but originally there would have been about 15. When the beads clatter together, you can feel it on your mouth. And we did make one of those, but they don't last very long. We can't make one that remains whole because the beads break and the rim of the cup breaks. So when the beads clash together, it feels like a kiss on your mouth. And if you have the cup like this, pointed this way, you can stop the beads clashing together. And then if you give it to the person who you want to feed the kiss, and you pass it the other way around, they can feel the beads clashing together. So we realized that it was something to do with Dionysus. And it was something to do with a power play. If you had like a dinner party, you could give somebody the cup and they would receive the kiss of Dionysus. And so that was exciting. But unfortunately, I haven't been able to carry on researching that because I didn't want to be a cup expert. I wanted to be a music expert. And so I'd already spent like a year and a half researching the cup. So I was like, I have to stop now and go back to music. So we got the musicians in the studio and we made one of them play a cup. We got somebody to play a lyre. We used lutes. We used some flutes. We used aulos, and we got a group of singers together. And they were the singers who had performed the music for the Lord of the Rings films. So when the elves were sailing across the water, they had sung in Elvish. And what I wanted was a group of singers. Oh, okay. So I wanted a group of singers who wouldn't have standard Latin. I wanted conversational Latin. So when you sing in madrigals or you sing in church, you're singing medieval Latin. And I didn't want that. I wanted conversational Latin. I'm sure you learn about that in Latin, but I knew nothing about it because my Latin's incredibly basic. So we got one of the fellows from Oxford to come and teach them how to say conversational Latin so that we could have all the lyrics from the songs in conversational Latin. And the lyrics, where did they come from? That's a good thing to talk about. So some of the lyrics were graffiti that were found at Pompeii. Some of the lyrics were poems. There's a poem by Sulpicia in there, who was a 16-year-old female poet. And there is a lullaby from the Bible, and I think it was either Matthew or John that wrote that, and it's the oldest lullaby in existence, and it's Sumerian, and it's I think it's 5th century BC, but it might be further back than that. I'm not entirely sure. We used the lyrics for that and wrote a lullaby. And then there was a few instrumental tracks. So because I was writing the Roman album and I wanted it to be used on TV and film, as well as for listening, I had to make the tracks a certain length. So when you're writing music for television adverts, you have to do what's called cut downs. So you have to be extremely accurate with your timings. So the length of each track was 3 minutes, 30 seconds. And I had to cut them down into 30 seconds, 60 seconds and 90 seconds so they would fit on a television advert. And that did affect the type of music that I used and the type of length of tracks that I used. But I think overall it's worth it to get the music out there and to be used on various different media. Gosh, I'm trying to think what else I can say about it.
How did you come to, why did you begin with that? To music?
I started doing it because I lost my mother when I was 17, and she was a classicist, and it was kind of a way of connecting to her. And also I had been in a youth music band, and we had gone to Italy to do a series of concerts. And the Pope's music advisor would come along to one of the concerts and asked if we would come and play for the Pope, and it was Pope John Paul II. And that was very exciting. We said, yes, that would be fine. We were told we would play for 10 minutes in St. Peter's Square. Went along to St. Peter's Square, and it had 12,000 people in it, and I didn't realise that was going to happen. And then we were asked if we could play for Pope John Paul II, and we were like, yes. And then he came out in his Pope mobile, and it took an hour and a half for him to go around, and he stood and listened for ages, and we carried on playing. And then he came up and he spoke to each one of us individually, and he said to me, music is your gift from God, and you'll be a musician. That's it. That's what you're going to do. But there's no question about it. And he was right. And he was of the group of us that went, I was the only one who turned into a musician, and the rest all went off and did other things. And it was a very it was a very special experience, and it was something that made me realize that I wanted to do something connected to the Bible and connected to the Romans. And it's taken me a very long time to put it into practice. There was a lot of skills to be learned. There was composition, and then there was using a studio and doing production music, and then music for TV and film, and then the PhD itself, which took a long time. So it took me 6 years. So it's been a long journey. So is there any questions that anybody would like to ask at this point?
So I'll say this, if people have questions, we'd like you to, maybe a little bit awkward, but that's fine. Come up here, and our wonderful tech folks, Mr. Phillips, Mr. Casey, I'll put an X on the floor. So if you would just stand over here by the X and then look at the camera that way, she can see you much better. So looks like you got a question, so just come on up, and then I'll tell you, you don't have to wait on anybody to call on you. If you've got a question, you can just even start lining up behind Isabel and go from there.
So out of curiosity, like what are the instruments like made out of, and like the tibia, like how did you like make those? Like what was the process you went through?
Well, this is the third time I tried to write a Roman album. So the first 2 times, because there was nobody else doing Roman music or Greek music, I had to substitute the instruments. So I used a medieval crumhorn and took the cap off. So a medieval crumhorn is a wooden instrument with a double reed at the top like an oboe, and then a cap on it, and that makes it more controllable. And it's there are a lot of them that are still in existence, especially here. So it was an easy instrument to use. So to do an aulos, I took the cap off and played directly into the double reed, and it gave an approximation of the sound I thought. In fact, it sounded nothing like an aulos. And it wasn't until people started playing the aulos, which has only happened recently. And one of the reasons that people are now playing the aulos is because of 3D printing. So you would, before, some of the auloses have been dug up and they don't really fit together, and there's bits missing. But what you can do now with a 3D printer is work out what it would have looked like, and then use that to make a resin one. And then what people are now doing is using bamboo or wood to make real ones. So we're not entirely sure what length they would have been. There's different ones, and they come from different periods. And also the important thing, one of the things that I found out about the musician of ancient Rome is that the socioeconomic status was low. So that means that musicians in Rome were kind of like musicians now, form a band, have no money, and carry on playing around for exposure until they make some money because they get really good, and then they can make it big. And it was the same. So it started off in Greece, and Greeks would come over to the Roman Empire and play in big concerts and then go back. And then the Roman Empire said, no, we want Romans only to come and play in our big spectacles and our large events. And so the Romans started playing and learning how to play aulos. And if you were a slave and you were captured in another part of the empire and you went into the Roman Empire and they said, have you got any skills? And you said, yes, I can play an instrument, you'd have a much easier life. And so even people who couldn't really play very well were saying, oh yeah, I'm great, I can really play flutes and the aulos and everything. And so they had to set up a guild to standardize how good you were. So basically they'd set you a little test. Well, can you play this tune? If you can't play it, then you're going to have to go and do cleaning. And if you can play, then you can go and be a musician. And so the guild eventually in the later bit of the empire said only children of musicians could be musicians. And so they really honed their skills right down. But the alloy came in all different sizes, like a recorder, really. So there's 2 pipes, you play it once, and they are around about a semitone in difference. So if one starts on an F, the one next to it will start on an F sharp. So that makes things tricky because there aren't that many tunes that need chromatic fingering. So a lot of people think that maybe you did a single note on the right pipe and you played the tune on the left pipe. That doesn't work. So well, it doesn't work on the aulos that I've worked with. Oh, sorry, that was an email. So I think there's still a lot of discussion about what it would have sounded like, what it was made of, and how long it was, and what the two pipes did. But the two pipes that I used were called the Louvre Aulos, because it was from the Louvre Museum, and they are about that long. The reed is about that long, and they're made of bamboo, and there was a semitone difference in between the pipes.
That's awesome.
And the lyres are interesting. Before you sit down, caught you. The lyres are interesting because there are simple and complicated lyres. So that made a massive difference to the music I could do on the album, because the complicated lyres were really expensive, but I don't think musicians had that much money. And I think they used simple ones made from turtle shell. So you would have a turtle shell with, in fact, I'll show you. You'd have a turtle shell with, I'm just going to share the screen. So here's a complicated lyre. And I'll see if I can line up the non-complicated one next to it. So can you see the difference in the number of strings? And that this one could do an awful lot more than this one. And the one on the left had those squares at the top are for tuning, but there's no obvious tuning method on the one on the right. And so I'm not quite sure how they did it, but I don't think the tuning would have been very good. And that's important as well. So how did they tune? And I suspect everybody tuned to them, not the other way around. Because it's easy to tune a flute. It's easy to tune an aulos. You just move the reed in and out. It's hard to tune a lyre. Am I screen sharing or not?
No.
Okay,
Now,
that's good.
I will say this. No great surprise to anybody in this room. I've got lots of questions. I'm certainly happy to ask some of those. But as folks have questions, if you're coming at it from a music perspective, if you're coming at it from a history perspective, if you're coming at it from a Latin perspective, whatever you want to ask. But Mary, we'll go ahead and throw one out to you here. And like I say, there's a lot that I could ask you, but so how comfortable do you feel that you are in terms of accuracy? And here's what I mean by this. Do you think that what's on the CD is pretty close to the kind of thing that somebody walking through the forum in the year 27 BC might have heard? Do you feel reasonably comfortable? And why do you feel comfortable knowing that? Because obviously we don't have recordings from the ancient world.
Yeah, I feel pretty comfortable. What I've given you there in that album is a soundscape, and it's a possibility. But I'm pretty comfortable that a Roman person listening to that would know exactly what I'd done. And the reason for that is that most people who've looked at this before have looked at it from a theoretical perspective. They're not a musician, they're a classicist. And it's because classicists hold the key to the language. And so classicists are very good at saying, this is what so-and-so says, this is what so-and-so says it sounds like, but they can't do it themselves because they're not a musician. And that's, I think, been the weakness of this discipline up to this point. And so you've got professional classicists that are hobby musicians, and that's not helpful. We need people to be working together. And classicists aren't great at working together with other people. And it's because they contain the keys to the language and they want to hold on to it. And I totally understand that, but that's not going to work. So what I did is I brought in Spencer Clavin to do the editorial stuff, and he translated all the Latin I needed to be translated. I brought in a fellow from Oxford who's a Plato specialist, and she looked at all the modes and made sure that I wasn't operating out with the translations that she knew about. And her job in the studio was to stand up and say, stop, if I did anything that she felt was not historically accurate. But what was interesting was when we got the players into the studio and we started playing together as an ensemble, there's only one scale that we can play in and only one mode that all the instruments can play in together. And that really made things easy because effectively we could only play in Dorian mode, modern Dorian mode. So when we're talking about modes, things get quite complicated because the Greeks had a system of modes. Now, modes are just scales that are slightly smaller than scales and contain a selection of notes. So it's just your artist palette. And they invented 5 of them to start off with. And then a little bit later on, Pythagoras, it said, invented the octave. He added a 7th string onto a lyre and invented the octave. And so they said, this is great, we've got more notes. So why don't we change all the modes? Now, we like the names of the modes, but what we'll do is we'll just change the modes and just rename them into other modes. So Lydian became Hyperphrygian, Dorian became Lydian, and they just changed them up. And then a bit later on, about 100 years later, they found some more notes. And they said, let's change the names of the modes. And then somebody said, let's not come up with new names because that's not efficient. Let's use the names that we've got because everyone knows them, but we'll just change them again. So they changed the names of the modes 3 times, but they did it by just using different modes, and they're the same names, they just use them for the different scales. And so it gets very confusing trying to work out what's what. However, that's for a classicist to work out. Happily for me, I didn't have to do that. I just got the students, the musicians into the studio and then said, right, what can we do? And there's only one mode we can do. And it's basically D to D with an F sharp. And that was a happy moment because there's only so much you can do with that. There's only so many strings. There's only so many songs, notes, intervals that you can have. And I'm pretty confident that a Roman would know what we were doing. And we used all their words. So they're going to know.
So I'm going to say something that I was saying in class, which is that students are the only brakes. Teachers will go as fast as we can with stuff. You're the only ones to slow us down. So I'm going to throw another question or two here. Interrupt, right? So after I'm asking questions, I thought you might have something. So Phil, do you want to come on up? Please, if you would.
It's a very short question.
That's fine, but let's Mary Ann see you a little bit better. So Phil, come on up.
All right.
Okay.
I have 2 questions. One, did you say Spencer Clavin?
Yes, Andrew Clavin's son.
Oh, cool. Also, did you find any evidence of syncopation? Do you know what syncopation? Like playing on the second half of a note.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. There's no evidence of no syncopation. There's no reason why they didn't use syncopation. If you can clap it and you can play it, there's no reason why they wouldn't have done it. There's a song called Mesomedes, which is a Greek hymn. And I think there is some syncopation in that. Do you want me to spell that for you? Have you seen that? The hymn to the sun, Mesomedes?
No.
Okay, so I can actually show you what it looks like. If you stay there, I can show you what the notation looks like. Okay, so are you seeing that? No. Right, here we go. Can you see that?
Oh, cool.
So this is Greek music notation. So the words are here. And then these little symbols above are like figured bass on a harpsichord. And so each of those little symbols denotes a note. But there's no rhythm, and the rhythm is denoted by the speech. So if you're going to say something in a syncopated manner, then you can play it in a syncopated way. So I would have thought there would be syncopation just because of the way that you speak, especially on a stage. Because if you think about something like Shakespeare, and you think about the way that you say a line to highlight the interesting words and the interesting parts of speech, sometimes you use syncopation for that. And so I think they would have used syncopation.
Oh, cool.
I just have a quick question for you.
Yes.
I know that you had it written out there, but was there a certain way of like writing sheet music? And if so, did you use that to compose?
No. the music that you saw on the pillar is pretty much the only evidence that we've got of what it looked like. No, I didn't. I just got manuscript paper and wrote it down and gave it to musicians and said, play this. And that was one of the questions I got on my PhD, because a PhD in the UK is not the same as in the US. So if you do a PhD, it's a taught course. And my PhD was not taught, it was a research. It was 4 years of research. And then I was questioned on it at the end. Sorry, ask me the question again. Just at this, I've gone blank.
We have sheet music like today, but like was there...
Yeah, they asked me if I'd done a graphic score or if I'd done anything that was more Greek. No, because I needed the musicians to play. Because when you go into a studio with musicians and you've got a record deal, because I had a record company there, there was about £100,000 on the line, and I wanted the musicians to be able to play that music and then get out of the studio as fast as they could so I could get the next thing done. And no, I didn't. I was just like, there you go. This is the best way I can show you what I want played. And so you're going to play this the best of your ability, and then we're going to move on to the next track as fast as we can so I can get the whole thing done in the time. I do have a copy of the music that I used. And if you would like me to send that to you, it won't be immediate because I have to make sure the PhD is approved first. But as soon as that is, and it should be in the next couple of weeks, I can send you that if you would like to see what the music looks like, because it doesn't look like it sounds. I gave them quite a basic idea. The other thing is because I work in film and TV music, I tend to use Cubase more than I use manuscript paper. Now, this was the first album I wrote down on manuscript because I wanted to be like a Roman. I didn't want to use 20th century. We call it 20th century conditioning. When you use tools of the 20th century or 21st century, it makes you write in a certain way. So that we call that 20th or 21st century conditioning. But if you want to write like a Roman, you have to actually get a pencil and paper out and do it. So that's what I did. But then as soon as I had written the tunes and written the harmonies and how I wanted it to be, I got it straight onto Cubase so that I could write a backing track, get it to musicians so we could all practice it. So I can send you both.
Thank you.
Okay.
We've got a student coming up.
Okay.
Okay, wait, is the camera right there?
The camera's right there, yes.
I was it's pointed that way. So
there you go.
Okay, so when you're done with the finished product and making like the accurate like Roman music, do you like send it to schools to like educate people, or like what kind of people do you give it to? Do you just drop it on like SoundCloud or Spotify, or like who do you give the music to?
Well, the Roman album was the first Roman album that I've done. And it hasn't been out that long. So it came out last year and we put it on Spotify and Apple Music and all of that. I haven't used it to educate people yet because it was part of my PhD, because it was my PhD submission. It was a practical part of that qualification. But partly because of COVID, it's taken a long time to finish the written part of it. And so we've been... my university couldn't mark because we weren't allowed to go into university, so nobody was marking anything, so nothing was done for a year. So I'm a year behind. The music went out first and then the written stuff went out later. Normally if I'm doing something for TV, you'll see it on a television program and there's nothing else. That sometimes I don't even know it's gone out. So for example, if I did some stuff for the Disney Channel, didn't realize it was there until I saw it on the Disney Channel, and I was like, oh yeah. And then you open your royalty check it and then you see you've done it because it's written down. So oh yeah, but I have done an audiobook for a Cambridge Latin reader. So if you do Latin next year and you get that Cambridge Latin reader, it will be in the audiobook.
So do you plan on creating like more of this music, or like do you plan on like spreading it more?
Yes. So the next thing I would like to do is music from the Bible. I would really like to recreate music from the Bible, and that's a big job. And one of the reasons it's a big job is because as I found out, it's quite hard to get Roman instruments to play well together. But in some of the parts of the Bible, it calls for vast numbers of instruments to be playing together. So I find it difficult to have one lyre and one aulos. At the end of the building of the Temple of Solomon, the Bible calls for, I think it's 300 lyres and 200 trumpets all playing together at the same time. And I'm not quite sure how to do that. Certainly not in the studio. So that needs to be worked out. But yeah, I'd love to do more.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to ask a quick question, and I see another student coming up here as well, Marianne. You talked about 3D printing, you talked about classicists, you talked about professional musicians. And one of the things I find so cool about that is you have people from some very different backgrounds working together.
Yeah.
Can you go into that a little bit more and talk to us about what were all the different kinds of people that you have worked with on this project in addition to those, and how was that more working with people from those different disciplines? Because one of the things I'm excited about in teaching high school is, and I always tell students, if you've got an interest in language and you've got an interest in computers or you've got an interest in history, you could bring multiple interests together and really have a fascinating career. And it sounds like that's some of what you're doing. So maybe talk a little bit more about those different kinds of people that you've worked with.
Well, when I first started the project, I had to get a record deal. So I had to approach a publisher and a record company and tell them what I wanted to do. And I realized early on that going to somebody and saying, I want to write Roman music was not going to get any reaction, because I'm going to the same people as I go to say, I want to write an album or I want to write some pop music. And if you go to the same people and say, I want to write Roman music, they're going to go, well, that's kind of niche. Like, how many people are going to buy that? Not that many. So I had to find a way of exciting them and making them feel like if they didn't have a part in the project, they were going to lose out. So it wasn't so much that I went to them and said, sign me. I went to them and said, if you don't sign me, you're going to miss out on this great project. And the way I did that was I went through every museum. I went through the top 5 museums in each country, showed the visitor numbers, and then said, if 1 in 100 people buy this CD, that's how many CDs you would be able to sell. And then they looked at my business plan and they said, yeah, that's great. We'll do it straight away. And then so because I had given them financial information, I was unable to say, this is how much I needed to invest in the project. And it was a hefty amount. And they did, and they were very pleased that they did. And that was good. So they were the first people. Then I worked with my brother to get the backing tracks done, because we used to work together all the time. We had a music production company, and that's who we do the pop music and the TV music. I always do that with my brother. So I had to go to my brother and say, I need you to spend a week doing the backing tracks. And he was kind of moany, but did it. And that was brilliant. And then I think the hardest thing was I realized I was going to have to make friends with the Greek classicists who were doing Greek music. And I wasn't quite sure how to do that, because I needed some of them to come over and help me with my project. And it's not easy to make friends when you know that you've got an agenda at the beginning. And so I noticed that Oxford University was doing a seminar, and I rang up and asked if I could attend. And it was a scary thing to do, to attend an Oxford seminar and just kind of walk in. There weren't that many people in the room, and they kind of said, oh, I see you're the composer. And I said, yes. I sat down, and then I asked questions of the people that were on there, and it was a scary thing. And but in the end, it was well worthwhile, because the friends I made that day were Spencer Claven, who did the translations, Tosca Lynch, who is a classicist and Plato specialist, and that was incredibly helpful, and really gave the Ph.D. and the music a lot of rigor in terms of it just gave it, because I had classicists and I had Plato specialists involved. I was able to say, you're able to show that it's more likely to be the real stuff, the real deal. All the music professionals I got were people I'd worked with previously on different TV projects, and that was really useful, just to have a contact book of people that played weird instruments and would be happy to take an even weirder instrument and practice it for you until they could play it. The Alos player was incredible, and he is one of only 2 Alos players in the world who play professionally. Yeah, there were a lot of people involved in the project. And then afterwards, marketing. So I had someone to run my social media because it got very hot very quickly, the social media and the my Twitter account and that kind of stuff. So someone came in and ran that for me. I had a PR company dealing with all of that. Yeah, so lots of people.
Lots of people. So we've got another student who's coming back up. And again, I would just say that is the great thing about, I think, the modern world and technology, so forth. We can have these kinds of interactions with different kinds of people, different places. And that's certainly something I'd want our students to take away. So Philip, you got another question.
What single period or subject of your research had you personally found the most interesting or exciting? Also, my teacher has like the exact same like pencil holder that you have on you.
Caesar, the Julius Caesar.
We do have that in our room. I'm glad you saw that. I didn't see that.
Yeah, I love that. That was a present. I'm very happy with it. And all the pencils have different quotes on from Julius Caesar as well. The period of, well, I think the thing that I'm proudest of is the rattle cup, because although it's just like a piece of cup and it's just clay, it's the thing that when classicists ask me, because classicists want something that they haven't seen before, and as soon as I pull the cup out, they're like, oh my goodness, because they've all seen the Getty cup and they all didn't know what it was and what it did. I'm not entirely sure it was a musical instrument. I think it was something to do with the cult of Dionysus, and I think it was an undercover way of people to find out if there were other members. So if you had a cup that rattled in your house, you were a member of the cult of Dionysus. But however, it could be used in the album, and the University of Oslo is pretty sure that it's a musical instrument, and that was good enough. So we used it.
You've enjoyed Pompeii as well.
Yeah. I went to Pompeii as well. That was amazing. The other thing, which is totally unrelated, is I happened to be living in Leicester when Richard III was found. And that was incredibly interesting because they reburied Richard III. And there was knights like dressed up in armor, like going up the high street with his coffin. And I did the music for that. So we learned that they found Richard III on Monday, and by Friday the CD was in the gift shop. That's how fast I had to work to get that going. So I had mastering engineers working through the night. I had studio engineers working just to get it into the gift shop by Friday. So the reinterment of Richard III, I don't know if you heard about that over there, but we found this king under a car park, and he was reinterred in the cathedral, and just having medieval knights up and down the high street was amazing, and just seeing all of that recreation of medieval life was amazing.
Thank you. I have a pretty short and simple question. What is your favorite ancient Roman instrument?
I like the alos. It's got a really strange timbre to it, which kind of means that, you know, it's so loud, but it's also really sweet and soft, and it's kind of it's a really interesting instrument. Also, it has this really unique noise at the end and at the beginning of a phrase, and it kind of squeaks. And I wondered if that was because the person who was playing it wasn't playing it that well. And then I discovered that by every alos player on a Roman vase, there's a goose. And I realized that that was the joke, and that alos players all over must have made that squeaking noise, because you always see a goose with an alos. So yeah, I think it was an in joke at the time, and it is a great instrument, and it's so different. I mean, it's kind of loops sound like small harps and lyres sound like small harps, but the aulos is totally different to any other instrument I've ever heard.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks.
Hi there. I have another question about rhythm. How did you make decisions regarding rhythm when you were writing? Did you use poetic rhythmic feet, or I'm just curious about how you went about doing that?
I use the lyrics a lot. So in the lullaby, there's no rhythm at all other than the rhythm of the words. In Copper Sariska, which is the first one on the album, that comes from a poem that was ascribed to Virgil and then unascribed to Virgil. So they don't think Virgil wrote it at all now. And it was a very kind of stomping like track. And there was a very visual element to that track because it told you exactly what the person was doing. And it told you exactly how she was dancing and why she was dancing. And so the rhythm of that track was really the rhythm of her feet on the floor. And that's how we treated it. So I tried not to go too out there. I tried to at least have a visual representation of what I wanted that wasn't kind of made up. The other thing was with harmony, I tried not to just use any harmony. So we know that they didn't use thirds a lot. And so the harmony I used tended to be like a walking harmony. So occasionally would meet and almost by accident, but there was no kind of, it wasn't like, there was no kind of pop chords. That didn't happen.
So did the harmony work? There were like two lines that would kind of work in their own ways and they might meet or?
Yeah, so mostly there was 3 lines. Okay. So quite often there was like a single note throughout the whole piece. And then there would be like a walking harmony, or there would be some kind of harmony where just occasionally you'd get a third or a fourth, and then it would wander off and do something totally different. So I also used canon a lot because that's one of the oldest forms of harmony. And you only have to have 2 musicians singing the same song at different street corners. No one can say that canon would never have happened on a Roman street, especially because of the number of large-scale events. So basically, the emperor wanted to communicate with the everyday people. And the way he did that was by having large-scale events and providing food. And that food everyone was very grateful for, felt nice about the emperor, and it kept the empire together long after it might have disintegrated. And when those large-scale events had stopped, you'd have a lot of musicians. And we know that they played on street corners because there are some stories about people falling out of windows accidentally while looking for the musicians on the street corner. And there's a lot of musicians in some of those events. They're in Trajan Column in Constantinople, you can see the lines of musicians. There was lots and lots of them. And so if you let them loose in Constantinople for 3 days afterwards, they'd have been playing at every single street corner trying to get money. Although rich Romans didn't carry around money, which I didn't realize. They had checkbooks. And that was wild when I found out they had checkbooks. So because apparently it was vulgar to be walking around with shopping. So you would have someone to carry your shopping and you wouldn't carry any money, and you just ask for the thing and they would write you a note and you'd write a check, and then your husband was supposed to go and pay it once a month with the vendor, but he never did, and so the vendor would have to come to the house and chase it, and so they would pretend not to be in, and there was a whole debt collecting thing going on. Yeah. So there was very few buskers, I think, just because of the people not having spare change. So I'm not quite sure how that worked.
Fascinating. Thank you.
So I do want to be respectful of everybody's time, especially people who are in England. But I do have one last question for sure that I want to ask. Do we have any other questions from folks here?
Favorite color?
Oh, good grief. He asked your favorite color.
Green.
Green.
How would you decide like how the sound should have been for the album? Because in a lot of media you use like Aeolian scale or harmonic or Aeolian mode or harmonic scales. And so was that something that was really featured in the album, or was the sound different? How do you decide?
Well, as I said, when I got into the studio, there was only one scale we could use, and there was only one scale that everyone could play together. And that was partly because the Alos hasn't got a huge amount of range. And it was partly because the simple lyres only have 5 strings, and you find yourself doing everything in D. And with the occasional C sharp if you're lucky, but really the range was so tiny, there wasn't a lot of scope. And so on the album, almost every single tune is in Dorian mode.
Other questions? So I know this because I've been on your website, but real quickly to share with the students here, how can people get this album from you or any other of your music? You mentioned the piece for Richard III that was in the gift shop. How can people purchase, listen to, follow you on social media? Give us all the ways that we can contact and follow you.
So Twitter, music_ancient. Is that right? Yes. And I'm on Spotify as Ann Tedstone. And the Roman album is on Spotify under Ann Tedstone Glover because I got married in between. And all of the other TV music and stuff, I think, is on Spotify under Ann Tedstone or Apple Music. If you want a physical copy of the album, I can send out physical copies of the album as well. But
I was going to say, because I know you have physical copies of the CD of the Roman music.
Yes, I do. I do have physical copies. So if you want a copy, you can email me at Marianne. Yeah, go to the website, and then if you go to the website, which is www.mariannetestoneglover.com, there is a link there to send me an email, and then you can send me an email and ask for a copy of the CD.
Okay,
or
fantastic.
Bandcamp is the other place you can buy a physical copy of the CDs. Bandcamp.
And Bandcamp as well. Okay, so right now, if we could do a quick Plaudite Omnes.